This week, is Elon Musk all that stands between free speech and big government? A former network journalist blows the whistle on corporate media manipulation. And Democrats in Louisiana are helping boost universal school choice. These stories and much more coming up this week on The Lion Week in Review. Welcome into this week's edition of The Lion Week in Review. It's a weekly look at the culture, the courts, your state capitol, and your kids. I'm Chris Stigall. Now, let's meet our panel, some of the men and women behind the stories at ReadLion.com. Josh Mann is our managing editor. Michael Ryan, executive editor of The Lion, and Jillian Schneider joins us, also a staff writer at The Lion. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Josh, we start with a positive one this week. I know a lot of times we don't have tons of positive news to talk about, but at least in my opinion, it's positive. Down there at the University of Georgia.
Yeah, it was an event that really began last year at the University of Auburn and kind of sparked a series of similar evangelical Christian gatherings, which invite students to come and worship. And there's a gospel invitation given, an invitation to these students who, if they're interested in making a decision, becoming a Christian, and then being baptized, they can. So this event in Georgia, which was April 3rd at the University of Georgia, it was held in their basketball arena. And the gathering was thousands of students, and I saw pictures, and that seems pretty accurate. And then after the event, around 150 were reportedly baptized in the beds of 4 pickup trucks. And so apparently the university had asked them not to hold baptisms on campus for liability reasons, and the leaders who were part of this, one of whom is named Jenny Allen, who sort of reported on this live that night on Instagram. She said, they weren't offended by that, but they just made arrangements to be able to perform those baptisms anyway. And so pretty remarkable event.
Yeah, Jillian, I don't know culturally what this means, or maybe you can't glean much from it, but every now and again, you like to look at the positive side of the culture, and this does seem to be a trend on a lot of college campuses. We're seeing some really massive spiritual events happening lately.
Yeah, we are, and that's great. And as Josh mentioned, this is something that started kind of at Auburn University last year, but we also saw the Ashbury revival. And I think it just goes to show you that, the college-age generation, my generation, is getting a lot of flack these days for, a variety of behaviors, not all of which I agree with. But I think it really shows that a lot of these young people are really, anxious about the world. They recognize that the world is broken. They're worried about the economy. They're worried about what the future holds for them. And so to have a message of hope reach to them and to have that gospel message shared is powerful, and it does resonate with young people. It's something they need to hear.
Michael, you agree this is sort of a revival of sorts we're seeing? It reminds me of the movie that came out last year, right, called Jesus Revolution. Yep. That was a little predated me, but that was actually a phenomenon that happened culturally not so long ago in our country's history. Is that what we're living through again?
It could be. It feels like it. I lived in Georgia, so I can tell you, getting baptized in a pickup truck, so Georgia. Outside of a frat, no less. But yeah, if you haven't seen the movie Jesus Revolution, you've got to see it. If you have seen the movie, then you know that they didn't really know at the start that they were in a Jesus Revolution. They had to be told by Time magazine. And this certainly feels like it.
Josh, man, the stories coming out of the St. Joseph, Missouri school district are kind of mind-numbing. There are several different ones you guys have been reporting at The Lion, and they're kind of a neighboring community to us here in our studio. Can you talk a little bit about what they've been experiencing up there?
Yeah, they've had a number of issues come up in the last 3 months, especially. One of the main ones is that one of the board members has been charged with second-degree harassment. Apparently after a closed session and after a full board meeting where the board struck down a 4-day school week in a narrow vote, one board member named Whitney Lanning pursued another board member through the halls, and there's video of this that's been posted, and Lanning appears to pursue Ishara Garcia, and she's yelling something at her. The video doesn't have audio in it, and throws some of her personal property against the wall. Continues to pursue Garcia, who's being shielded by another board member, David Foster, from Lanning. And so this was a big deal in the district. She's been charged. She just had her first court date April 3rd, which was the day after an election. Now, the April 2nd election, there was a big school bond that passed pretty easily, actually. 66% of the vote passed to give the school district $20 million basically to do some upgrades. So while all that's happening, just after the election, the superintendent, Gabe Edgar, reported, basically the school district posted a thank you video from Edgar, thanking people for their support of the school bond. But in that video, he thanks his own communications director at the school district for working with a political action committee and coordinating, he says, from the district end. That's what he said.
Oh.
Now that raises some red flags about the potential that some electioneering was happening. And so the Lion has sunshined the school district for more information, for possible correspondence between district employees and this political action committee called Friends of SJSD. And we're kind of waiting to get to the bottom of it. But one national education expert and board member of a legal group who's looked into these kinds of cases, Corey DeAngelis, told us that he thinks it certainly demands an investigation from the Secretary of State, who has jurisdiction in this case.
Wow. I don't know if you're a citizen of that community, Michael. I'd think you'd have to be looking long and hard at perhaps, I mean, I know they're talking about maybe even a recall election out there.
Yeah, and this sort of thing is going on across the country. We reported at the Lion recently that there are a couple of principals in Denton, Texas, who are charged with illegal electioneering for sending out emails telling people which people to vote for in the Republican primary that might be favorable to public schools versus school choice. Missouri statutes, quote, prohibit school districts from using public funds to support a ballot measure. Why is this important? This is important because the government at any level cannot be allowed to use this awesome power and resources to coerce the public to bend to its will. And it's just a very slippery slope, and it can't be allowed to start on it.
Jillian, I want to pivot to you for a minute. This is a story. Sage Steele has been an interesting figure here lately. In maybe the last several months. We know her departure, kind of a high-profile departure from ESPN. She most recently said, though, and this isn't really the focus of your story, but I'd ask you to comment on both your story that you've written as well as this. She said that once she had to conduct an interview with Joe Biden on ESPN, and it was scripted entirely, and she was told very specifically not to deviate from the script. Does that surprise you much, given the story you've written?
Now we have heard from a lot of people about what's going on in the Biden administration recently. No, that doesn't surprise me at all. And it for those who haven't read the story, Sage Steele was at ESPN and got a lot of flack and eventually left ESPN over a slew of issues. The vaccine mandate that she was publicly critical of, that ESPN put on all of its employees, racial issues. She made a few comments about Obama way back in 2014 that her employers brought up again in 2021 when they suspended her. And so she doesn't have, any radical, crazy right-wing views, just very normal, traditional, somewhat conservative, and was just totally blackballed by ESPN for expressing those views and ended up suing them and settling a lawsuit with them. And I think her story is so important because now that she's choosing to speak out, she's really receiving a lot of criticism, but she's also receiving a lot of support from people who are thanking her because they're too afraid to speak out, and she's being a voice for them.
Michael, you're a journalist, and you've written for some high-profile venues in the past. How important is it for people like her to step forward and say, here's what you need to know about where I came from. They made me stick to a script. I was not doing independent journalism. And is it important that we have whistleblowers in journalism right now like her?
Oh, never more important than now. And the fact is that she said her colleagues at ESPN were allowed to touch on these subjects, but from the left-wing point of view, and that was fine. But once she started talking about things from a center-right position, she got in big trouble. And I love what she says. She says, you cannot pick and choose who is allowed to speak. And we see that all over the globe right now, especially in the West, where people are getting silenced for their non-politically correct views. And she identifies as biracial rather than black, which she differentiates from Mr. Obama on that. And she's getting a lot of pressure to identify as black as opposed to biracial. But so they want her to deny the white side of her family, and she doesn't like that. That's not her. It appears that now political correctness is not only kind of a social pressure; it's the law.
It's interesting, Josh. I talked with Michelle Tafoya, former sideline reporter for NBC. She does her own program now. And I talked with her back, if you remember, when a couple of journalist sideline reporters, now I've forgotten their names at the moment. Erin Andrews, I know, was one, and I've forgotten the lady that does the podcast with her. But nevertheless, they were talking about these sideline reports, and sometimes when they couldn't get access to the coaches, they would just make up a quote. And I asked Michelle Tafoya, is that problematic? And she said, well, yeah, for all of us who are journalists, maybe that doesn't seem like that big a deal. But making up a quote from a coach at halftime, that is making up news, and that's a problem for people like you, I would assume, who care about doing journalism well and being trusted.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we should and need to promote journalistic integrity, and kudos to Steele, who, I mean, is a woman of steel. She's come out. She filed a lawsuit against her basically employer of her dream job. But she talks in the interview about how she wanted from a young age to be a reporter for ESPN, and she's been a woman of conviction consistently throughout her career, and I think that comes across in that interview, and I would commend that to our readers. A few things that stuck out to me. One is when she got an offer in 2004 from ESPN, dream job offer number one, and she declined it because at the time, I think they had 2 kids, whatever it was, they were wanting another child or 2. Like, she had determined what her priorities were. She wanted to be a family woman. She wanted to make sure she raised her kids to a certain point and had them on the right track. And so she declined the offer. And she was warned that you probably won't get it again. Well, she did. But the point to me was she's been a woman of conviction her whole career, and nothing's really changed. And so she found herself on the wrong side of a certain point of view, and I think kudos to her for being brave. She is getting some support now. But one thing she said that I thought was so important is, she says, if we truly believe in diversity, it's diversity of thought, we must begin there. And I think that touches on what she has faced, but also what we do every day at the Lion.
We're going to get into another story Michael's written at the Lion recently on what's going on in Brazil, but it occurs to me I'd like to kind of go around the horn, Jillian, and start with you. Because you're all journalists, the state of journalism today, how would you describe the state of journalism today? I will speak for myself and say that I think there's just such profound mistrust between the public and a lot of American journalists that now the vacuum is being filled by, frankly, kookery and conspiracy theory, and it feels like we're really going backward in terms of trustworthy information. What's your view?
Yeah, I definitely empathize with the sentiment that I hear from a lot of conservatives, even the idea of, let's get back to the days of the news just being the facts, the kind of Walter Cronkite, just give us it straight, don't have any sort of political agenda. And I wish that the news was more like that it was more trustworthy and less biased than it is. And yet I think we also have to acknowledge just where we are as a society, and that it is incredibly difficult to just give straight facts without any sort of angle or even choosing particular words or using rhetoric in a way to express one's point of view. And I don't know that we need to completely scrub that sort of our viewpoints from reporting in order to be valuable. And so I think the thing that's most important for people to do nowadays is to be getting news from multiple different sources, especially sources that you don't necessarily agree with politically, and getting that well-rounded viewpoint. But I do wish that there was more less bias in journalism, but I think we also have to just be realistic about where we are.
That is an interesting point, Josh, because then I'm going to go to Michael and have him tee up this latest story out of Brazil. What Jillian said, is it more about just transparency of the point of view from the journalism outlet than it is trying to report it straight down the middle. Maybe there was no such thing as straight down the middle. Maybe there never was. Maybe it's just there's a lot of media out there. We'll tell you who we are. They tell you who they are. Read us all, and then you decide. Is that the optimal?
I think that's mostly correct. I mean, I would agree with it anyway. That maybe it never was completely neutral. We tend to remember things a little bit better than they really were. However, I think Jillian's point is important as well. The dangerous thing is when news organizations act like they're neutral, but they're really not. Mm-hmm. And what we've been seeing, in fact, Michael's written another piece besides the one we're about to reference on an NPR editor who has come out and said, given some similar concerns about NPR, and I'll let Michael speak to that if he wants. But this is one more journalist in a line of multiple. Adam Rubinstein, another, and there was another editor at the New York Times who recently wrote about this, that their newsrooms basically became opinion departments, but they weren't admitting it. They weren't willing to fess up that, yeah, we have a point of view. You know, at the Lion, we have a point of view, and we're upfront about it. And so I think that's important. That's part of the journalistic integrity. But for news organizations to pretend like they're neutral when they're really, in fact, not, that's where I think there's some major concerns.
So we turn to the coverage, Michael, of Brazil, and this is something I agree, you know, on a show that I do outside of the Lion. I've called my audience's attention to this. This may be a harbinger of things to come if we're not careful here in the United States.
Oh, a lot of people feel that way. Back on the other piece, though, about journalism in general. You know, I was in newspapers 40 years. There was always bias. But I think it's moved from bias to, in many cases, absolute corruption. They've corrupted the noble mission of journalism. It's just heartbreaking. And that Barry Weiss interview, former New York Times editor interview of the NPR official who's still working there, is just hair-raising. It's just unbelievable stuff. And the bottom line is you have to educate yourself. I mean, you can't rely on legacy media outlets anymore. You have to go to alternative sources.
So I will ask you that quickly. Just because I asked Josh, I'll ask you too. Is it more about outlets just being upfront about who they are, and as long as everyone's square with the consumer and you know what you're getting when you consume it, then you encourage the consumer to consume many, many different outlets as long as they know what they're getting when they read?
Yeah, I guess you can identify as anything if you're a publication, but I think it's more important what you actually are.
Yep.
If you can imagine a tree of journalism, in 200 or 300 years, you cut down that tree, I predict you will find a ring in that tree that points to the 2016 election of Donald Trump. And that's where things really went south for journalism. I mean, the folks at NPR and the guy at NPR talked about how it really went south there after Trump came on the scene.
How important is social media in this discussion? We find it's very critical, obviously, in Brazil. I mean, what role has social media played in this whole discussion?
For me,
yeah,
it's become paramount. I'm telling my friends now, you cannot educate yourself on the issues if you're not on X, formerly Twitter. I had to be forced by one of my employers to get onto Twitter. I'm just not a social media guy. But that's where I get most of my news. You have to be careful because it's largely a Wild West frontier. I mean, you got to be careful what you believe.
Yep.
But at the same time, they're getting stories on there from citizens and basically citizen journalists that you're not going to see on most networks or in most newspapers. And again, in my opinion, you are not informed if you're relying on the TV networks or the newspapers anymore, and that's really sad. Do you want to talk about this case in Brazil?
Please.
Because it does involve Elon Musk and his ex. Mm-hmm. So it's close to my heart because I'm both a journalist and a fan of Brazil. I've been there 3 times. I have friends down in Brazil. So to see this free speech crackdown in Brazil, it just breaks my heart. So what you have there is a Supreme Court justice basically ordering social media companies to take down posts and accounts that are basically putting out what he calls misinformation. We've heard that term up here, haven't we? And the so-called misinformation includes criticism of him and the Supreme Court. Elon Musk alone among the social media giants has said, no, I'm not going to do that. He's defying the Supreme Court of Brazil. And so they're threatening him with fines, $20,000 a day per user, and they're looking into a criminal indictment of him. But he is willing to say that he's not going to put profits before principle, and God bless him for that. Michael Schellenberger, citizen journalist, basically has reported on this extensively on X and says that Brazil is on the brink of dictatorship.
Jillian, how important is it? We talked a little bit about J.K. Rowling last week. She said to her, I think, Scottish officials, come arrest me. I believe men are men and women are women, and if you have a problem with that, come arrest me. How important are Elon Musk's and J.K. Rowling's to just standing up and saying no?
I think it's so important because if people like them who, are very frankly wealthy and powerful aren't willing to stand up to the government, who will? And I think it comes down to the point that for us as conservatives, we need to be willing to defend free speech, not only for our own sake so that we can continue expressing our points of view, but for everybody. Because if we hamstring the First Amendment, as our Supreme Court has expressed, if we say, actually feelings are more important, or, anti-discrimination or whatever these other ideas are more important than free speech, then we lose basically what our entire country was founded on, which was that we have the right to say things that other people like. We have the right to say things that make other people uncomfortable. We have the right to express views that might be factually incorrect. And if we lose those very basic freedoms, then we lose basically what America was founded on, and it's some of the most fundamental parts of a functioning and healthy society.
Is there more readily available, free access to information today than ever before, or no? I guess I'll add just a brief kind of a maybe yes or no or brief thought on that, Josh. More information than ever before, less trustworthy information than ever before. How do you kind of assess it? 30,000 foot view. Yes, yeah.
Yes to both, I think. I mean, the volume of information is overwhelming. And so it's very accessible, but we have certain pinholes we have to look through, and that's via Google search for most people. It's going to be AI. That's a big conversation for another time, but AI is increasingly going to give us customized looks into the volume, the huge library.
Two things, if I could, real quickly.
Please.
One is I'd like to put a commercial in for the Lion, because if you're not reading the Lion, you do not know the extent of what's going on in schools today. All right, that's number one. Number two, in my piece on the Lion, I compared Elon Musk to the Tiananmen Square tank man who stood in front of the tanks of the Communist Party of China, trying to crack down on the freedom fighting in Tiananmen Square. And one thing that Michael Schellenberger said about Elon Musk is, quote, "The fact that the future of free speech rests upon the shoulders of a single individual is not something any of us should want."
This is a big conversation, one we could probably do an entire special on in the future, and we may very well. But Jillian, we'll turn to another story at the Lion that you've been working on in Seattle. All kinds of interesting things are always happening out of the Pacific Northwest and public schools. What's going on there?
Yes, they are. So the Seattle Public Schools has effectively gotten rid of its gifted learning program. What that looks like on a practical level is that they had a few schools that were kind of magnet schools within the district for students who tested in like the 98th percentile, so very, very high, to go and learn at those schools with students like them and teachers that had special trainings that they could work with those sorts of students. And Seattle Public Schools noticed that there was a slight disparity in the average, the race distribution in the district overall, and the races that ended up being more at these gifted schools. And they said, that's not okay. We need to have it be equitable. And so they've cut these schools and are now trying to reintegrate the gifted students back into their neighborhood schools, or whatever their locally zoned school would be. And it really is, fundamentally, it's doing a disservice not only to the students, but also to the teachers and to parents. There was one mom who testified who said that her son was a gifted student, and she acknowledged, she said when he was in a regular classroom, he was a nightmare because he wasn't being challenged by his teachers. It wasn't rigorous enough for him. And so he was really difficult to deal with. It had all these behavioral issues. But when he went to the gifted school where he was challenged, he thrived and did much better. And so we think that we're somehow helping people by trying to make everything racially equal and having all the same outcomes. But what it really does is a disservice to students and parents and to teachers, because it makes their job 10 times harder as well.
Yeah, can you ever balance people that test into Ivy League schools or gifted programs, Josh, man? I'm not even sure that's achievable if you're trying to socially engineer something.
One thing I'm beginning to learn is that humans are typically really good at making things balanced and fair when we try to. It's better to create as fair a system as you can, meaning equal opportunities, not equal outcomes. When we try to finagle the outcomes and make those equal, that's when I think we really start to discriminate. And I think we're seeing this. I think it's obvious to a lot of people, but I think there's still some well-meaning folks in the educational bureaucracy and at the university researcher kind of level who they haven't got the memo yet. And so they really believe that equitable education means no gifted, no, and yet equal outcomes is not what is fair. It's not American.
Yeah, Michael,
equal opportunity is.
That's right. I remember growing up as a kid, and I remember the gifted kids. I was not one of them, but I always thought, wow, that's, they're the smart ones. That's always been the case. I know the Supreme Court's even weighed in on, for instance, a heavy population of Asians usually testing very well, getting into Ivy League institutions. And then Ivy Leaguers started to say, oh, we have too many Asians, as if that's a bad thing. I mean, it's its own kind of racism, isn't it?
Well, it would seem so. And as Josh is talking about equal outcomes, it seems a very Marxist tenet to me, the proposal that we should all finish the race at the same time. It seems that no child left behind is morphed into no child gets ahead. The fundamental question here, I think, is, should I hold your child back to make my child feel better? And that's a real fundamental question in this debate. And, and part of the story here is, as Jillian has reported, that even black parents are protesting this sort of move to get rid of gifted programs.
Jillian, final story today is out of Louisiana, and it's pretty fascinating. We're seeing this around the country, the bipartisan push for school choice. You've covered this from a Democrat's perspective in Louisiana.
Yeah, so very exciting news. There's a universal school choice bill that's making its way through the Louisiana legislature. There's actually two, one's in the House and one's in the Senate. And the one that originated in the House has been formally approved by the House, and it did so with several of the Democrat legislatures voting in favor of it, which is a little bit of a break in typically what the Democrat Party line is. They're heavily funded by teachers' unions, and so Democrat politicians tend not to support school choice. But there was one in particular, Jason Hughes, who gave a very fiery speech in favor of this bill. He said that we cannot continue to maintain the status quo effectively if it's not serving students. And we know that it's not serving students. And we've seen this sort of support from Democrats. In Georgia, Maynor was a representative from Georgia who actually switched parties over the issue of school choice. She was a Democrat, and now she's a Republican. And we've seen this most recently. We haven't even published this story yet, but in Nebraska as well, there's some Democrats who are coming out and saying, listen, we need our students need a high quality education, and public school ain't cutting it. So we need to find ways to give them other opportunities. So we're very excited about this Louisiana school choice bill. Governor Jeff Landry who's a new governor, is strongly supportive of school choice. And so there's a very good chance that Louisiana will be the 12th or maybe the 13th or the 14th state to pass this legislation.
Michael, is the power of the teachers union and its influence starting to slip here with Democrats?
Well, perhaps. They may be on the wrong side of this issue, certainly. And it takes a lot of courage to stand against those who you're normally allied with. This program in Louisiana would be the 12th universal school choice program in the country, the second one this year alone. School choice is exploding. I mean, it's just exploding across the country. And you have to wonder, can you stop this train? And why would you even try, especially when you are near the bottom academically like Louisiana is. What's really exciting about this is that states are education labs now. I mean, we've got laboratories all across the country finding out what works because they're trying different things. It's the beauty of federalism.
Yes, it's it's kind of when you stop and consider, Josh, that the education department federally has only been around since 1977, the year of my birth. That's really not that long. I mean, when you think about the institutions in Washington, that's kind of a new concept. So deregulation and federalizing public education.
I mean, what did we do before the Department of Education?
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
I guess kids weren't educated. Oh, wait. No, they were.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Worked out.
Are you optimistic that this kind of union between teachers' unions and political parties is starting to break?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the jury's out, but I'm just unsure. The teachers' unions still have a lot of power, and as long as they have power, they're going to use it to their ends. And I do think that school choice is something that so many families want. And I've talked with teachers and former educators who are also pro school choice, but feel pressure from the union not to say so. And so I know some teachers who are considering sending their own children into Christian education. And one teacher I know is considering teaching in a Christian school. And so choice is the American way. We need these labs. We need to let people be free to make choices that they feel are best for them. School choice does that, and it seems like just a slam dunk of Americanism. So we'll see.
Yeah. We always like to go around the horn to wrap up each show asking the Lion staff what their favorite story at readline.com is of the week. Michael Ryan. Sorry, Ryan.
That's
We're on
right,
first name basis now. You're kind of like, it's like you're a coach now.
right.
Michael Ryan, your favorite story of the week.
It's actually a reader-submitted op-ed. We found God, how the opportunity for Christian education led my family from atheism to Jesus. This is a couple in Missouri who weren't exposed to religion growing up and now have the opportunity to expose their children to it in school because of school choice.
Josh Mann.
Well, this is a story that some of our readers probably have already heard about. The NAIA, a Collegiate Athletics Association of mostly smaller colleges, has come out in a 20-0 vote to approve a transgender policy that will disallow biological males from competing in women's categories of sports. It's an important story because the CEO, as he's come out and talked about this, is just taking a common sense approach and saying, look, this is about fairness. As an athletics association, as a governing body, we have to ensure fairness in women's sports. So transgender competitors can still compete in the male category, but not in the women's, and it just seems common sense to me.
Jillian, you get the last word today. Your favorite story of the week.
My favorite story is about Grand Canyon University, who is being targeted effectively by the federal government. The Department of Education and the Federal Trade Commission are suing Grand Canyon University. They've leveled a $37 million fine against them for allegedly having deceptive marketing practices to students, lying about how expensive their classes are, how many courses are required to graduate. And Grand Canyon is fighting these fines, obviously. They say that it's all ridiculous. And in the past week, they've been audited by several state institutions, but one recent audit came out that said that there was zero findings that Grand Canyon University hadn't done anything wrong. They've acted completely above board. And so, of course, this is very vindicating for Grand Canyon University and for Christian higher education as a whole, that Grand Canyon, which has just exploded in enrollment, has been super popular. I've known several people who have gone there and loved it. And that Christian higher education isn't just something that people are, it is something that people are really passionate about. And the government is trying to stamp it out, and it's not working. And that's just so encouraging.
Jillian, thank you. These stories are all found at readline.com. And as Michael Ryan so well said, these are stories that you'll only find at readline.com if you care about these issues. That'll do it for us this week, but I do hope if you want to keep up on all these stories and so many more each and every day, go to readlion.com. For all of us at The Lion, thanks for downloading the show, and we'll see you next time.